Evening. I want to thank you for the invitation to address the Global Studies program at the University of Virginia, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary. It is a privilege to be your guest speaker on this occasion, and congratulations on your anniversary. I note that learning communities or tracks in the program are engaged in study and research in areas which relate to a number of issues I will address here this evening. These include the areas of development studies, environments and sustainability, public health, security and justice, and commerce in culture and society. But before addressing two major transnational challenges the Bahamas faced during my tenure as Prime Minister from 2017 to 2021, may I offer you, for context, a little of the geography and economic realities of the Bahamas. Tourism is our primary economic sector, which directly or indirectly employs nearly half of our workforce. Approximately 60% of our overall GDP is derived from tourism. Tourism and travel are amongst the largest industry globally. And without tourism, the Bahamas would collapse economically. Imagine, therefore, the huge and potentially crippling impact of hurricanes or a pandemic on our tourism industry and broader economy. The Bahamas archipelago extends southwards from southern Florida in the United States to northern Cuba. It encompasses an area of 100,000 square miles and extends over 50 miles from north to south, that is Florida to Cuba. With over 700 islands and thousands of keys, we have approximately 2,200 miles of coastline. Our far-flung archipelago, with 21 major islands, extends from north to south, covering approximately the same distance as from Puerto Rico in the central Caribbean to Trinidad in the southern Caribbean. And despite our small population of around 400,000, the Bahamas is a huge ocean nation. You can imagine what this means for transnational threats, including trafficking in guns, narcotics, human beings, and related threats. We do not have the fiscal or material resources to adequately police our skies and waters. This is why we have had to rely on the assistance of the United States of America. As an archipelago, the Bahamas faces a number of more complex and additional development challenges than most small island states in the Caribbean that comprise a single landmass or only a few islands. The Bahamas has to replicate services such as education, healthcare, security, ports, roads, electricity, telecommunications, airports, and other essential services over a wider expanse. It also means that when a hurricane strikes, we cannot relocate residents on some islands by land. In 2017, during Hurricane Irma, I was warned that a number of our less populated southern islands were under grave threat because of the intensity and destruction of this particular storm, a Category 5 hurricane. Some of these areas lacked durable shelters. Moreover, it would have taken some time for the central government to engage in rescue, recovery, and relief efforts in these areas. Accordingly, in a first in the history of the Bahamas, I had to order an air evacuation of some areas. Air evacuations are more difficult and require greater resources. Hurricane Irma was in some ways a warning of things to come. 2 years later, we were visited by a monster storm whose name was Dorian. And Hurricane Dorian was an unprecedented destructive force of wind and rain and sea surge that ripped into the islands of the northern Bahamas beginning on September 1st, 2019. The naturally warm aquamarine and jade waters of the Bahamas, made even warmer by the emission of earth-warming carbon gases, were rapidly forged and mobilized into instruments of death and destruction. Bahamians went to bed with Dorian as a Category 4 hurricane. The next morning, the country awoke, horrified at how quickly the storm had strengthened to a Category 5 storm. With unrelenting fury, Hurricane Dorian lingered for painful hours on end, with its deadly force laying waste to communities where children were preparing for the beginning of a new school year. It remained stationary over the islands of Grand Bahama and North Abaco with destructive winds, storm surge, and rain hazards exacerbated for the 30-hour fixed position of the storm's eye wall on some communities, 30 hours. At its peak, Dorian had maximum sustained winds of 185 miles per hour and gusts to over 220 miles per hour. In fact, some of the young gentlemen in some of the affected communities had wind velocity gauge, and they had monitored this wind velocity to as high as 285 miles per hour. There were storm surges of 18 to 23 feet above normal tide levels, roughly 3 times my height of 6 foot. The picturesque and industrious principal town of Marsh Harbor on Abaco essentially disappeared. There was nothing left of it but heaps of rubble. East End, on our second most populous island, Grand Bahama, was in ruins. Dorian became the worst Atlantic hurricane in history to hit the northern Bahamas. Surveying the devastation by helicopter after the hurricane, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated, "I'm horrified by the level of devastation. I've never seen anything like this." Ladies and gentlemen, the small island countries in the Caribbean, in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, and in the Indian Ocean, and around the world are on on the front lines of being swallowed into an abyss, created initially by human activity and increased by inactivity. Because of the geographic distribution of the Bahamas, any number of hurricane trajectories may result in dire and protracted implications of our inhabited islands. Our warming climate results in the increased severity and frequency of hurricanes for our archipelago, and it destroys our natural defenses against such storms. Coral and mangrove degradation, land erosion, increased tidal movements and other consequences of global warming increase our vulnerability and handicap our ability to develop and to establish effective resilient measures. We cannot sustain development if we are ravaged by such catastrophic natural disasters year after year, decade after decade. We cannot make meaningful progress toward or achieve sustainable development goals if, as forecasters are predicting, that recent cyclones and other extreme climate events are poised to become the new normal and may worsen. Imagine being hit by a Category 6 or Category 7. When one storm can obliterate an island state or a number of states in one hurricane season, how will we survive? How can we develop? How will we continue to exist? The Bahamas fully supports United Nations comprehensive strategy to address a global climate emergency which will eventually devastate the entire planet. This includes the plea to international financial institutions to provide concessionary financing to countries severely impacted by the external shocks occasioned by climate change. The reality is that small states like the Bahamas do not possess the resources on our own to respond to such major disasters. We do not have sufficient emergency responders, supplies, marine, air, and land vehicles. We do not have adequate facilities, especially in the case of the Bahamas, if a hurricane strikes a less developed island with limited healthcare and other infrastructure. When I first visited parts of Abaco and a number of the Abaco Keys, which were most affected by Dorian, it looked as if an atomic bomb had exploded. The power grid was destroyed, as was the main port and many other basic services and facilities. Again, without support from the international communities, the Bahamas did not have the capacity needed for rescue, recovery, and rebuilding. As with other jurisdictions, rebuilding will take many years. Small countries do not possess adequate internal funding to respond and to rebuild following such disasters. This means the further acquisition of an ever-increasing government debt, which we must service. And such debt Such debt servicing means that less revenues are available for education, less revenues for housing, healthcare, infrastructure, and other necessities. Responding to such natural disasters will be a new normal that may retard sustainable development in many countries. Following a natural disaster, law and order can quickly break down, making an already difficult situation rapidly much worse. There was debate in my government as to whether to bring in security personnel from the member states of the Caribbean community known as CARICOM. And after careful deliberation, we contacted Caribbean leaders and they agreed that additional personnel should be brought as soon as possible. Jamaica in particular sent members of its defense force to assist us with security measures. In addition to the brave men and women of our security forces, we were aided by security assistance from the United States, Caribbean, Britain, and the Netherlands. This made an enormous difference. During our recovery efforts, an assistant photocopied a chapter from the historian Doris Kearns Goodwin's excellent book, Leadership in Turbulent Times. The chapter I was given was a study of President Teddy Roosevelt's intervention in the 1902 coal strike. Roosevelt learned a number of lessons about crisis management during that period, from which I took a number of valuable lessons. After Dorian, I kept hearing conflicting reports of the security situation on the grounds on the island of Abaco. Following Roosevelt's experience, I went to see firsthand what was going on in real time in terms of the security needs. This proved critical in helping to improve the security situation on the ground. The major lessons are: amass as many of the facts as possible and see for yourself what is going on. People will continue to tell you what they think you want to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, with the Bahamas still reeling from the devastation of Hurricane Dorian, within months, we were quickly faced with a global pandemic. In early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the great historic pandemics, shattered the global and national economies. International tourism came to a dramatic and unprecedented halt. Much worse than in the 2008 Great Recession, the Bahamas economy collapsed within months. We experienced tremendous loss of GDP, tourism numbers, government revenue, savings, and other chilling statistical declines. Our losses were equally measured in increased unemployment, greater personal and business debt, and food insecurity for tens of thousands of Bahamians. Because we are a far-flung archipelago, our challenges in responding to both Dorian and COVID-19 at the same time were made greater. This was especially so because many of our more rural areas in our family of islands have limited healthcare facilities, medical supplies, and personnel. There was much that was not known about the virus? How dangerous was it? How easily was it transmitted? How might it mutate? And could it become even more dangerous? How long might such a pandemic last? How many people could die? Do we have sufficient health facilities, supplies, and medicine to take care of the ill and the dying? Because I served as a medical doctor for many decades and previously served as Minister of Health, I was acutely aware of what was needed to respond to a pandemic. As Prime Minister, I knew that to save lives and livelihoods, my government had to respond comprehensively to a wide range of health, economic, and social needs. One of the first response to a major crisis is to find the right leadership. We were fortunate in the Bahamas to have a medical doctor with tremendous experience in public health in general and pandemic response in particular. I was pleased at that time to appoint Dr. Mercelin Dahl-Regis as my special assistant. She played a pivotal and essential role in coordinating our comprehensive health care response. She was joined by a team of other medical professionals and civic leaders. As the world went into crisis mode, economies went into meltdown, global travel grounded to a halt. Supply chains of many goods were disrupted, including food and other vital goods. Government revenues collapsed. Lockdowns became a tool of vital response, especially as there were no vaccines to protect against the virus, especially older citizens and those with compromised immune systems. Even when vaccines became available in developed countries, countries like the Bahamas could not get vaccines for many months. On top of a public health crisis, we now had an economic crisis and social crisis in terms of feeding thousands of people, and an education crisis in terms of getting school children enrolled in online education as quickly as possible. When vaccines became available, the country had to undertake and efficiently and as quickly as possible the largest vaccination program in Bahamian history. Our COVID-19 Vaccine Consultative Committee played an extraordinary and vital role in getting as many people vaccinated as quickly as possible. The committee, which included individuals from the public and private sector, proved to be an excellent case study in collaboration and efficiency. Like many other jurisdictions, we had a tremendous challenge getting citizens and residents vaccinated. Mass misinformation resulted in many refusing to be vaccinated. We undertook a mass public communications program and utilized many platforms and messages to get people vaccinated. Public officials and the communications team in the Office of the Prime Minister undertook numerous and sustained communication efforts to educate the public about the virus and our responses. Many Bahamians needed immediate and sustained food assistance. Accordingly, we launched a nonprofit sector-led National Food Distribution Task Force. As noted in one of our dailies, I quote, "In the spring of 2020, a massive public-private partnership was constituted in response to the greatest socio-economic and food crisis in the nation's history. It was the largest and most successful social program in our nation's history," end quote. Critically, many migrants in need were also provided with food. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 demonstrated the vital need for teamwork, for creativity, and openness to getting the best people possible to assist in times of crisis. It also demonstrated the need to apply the best technologies and methods to various transnational challenges. A lady with a comorbidity told me after the worst of the pandemic that she was hesitant about getting vaccinated. But she eventually did. She did because a dear friend convinced her to do so, and due to the many sustained public messages. She said, in retrospect, she is convinced that the vaccine helped her to avoid serious illness and perhaps saved her life. And at the end, this is what it was all about: saving and protecting life. As in every jurisdiction, there was considerable criticism of the government's pandemic response. Some of it justified, but some of it also ill-informed. No government got everything right. In hindsight, various governments may have made a number of different decisions. However, I truly believe in my heart, and as some international observers stated, the Bahamas did many things right given the circumstances. The transnational threats of climate change and related natural disasters, as well as public health challenges such as pandemics, require ongoing study and creative response. May I end my remarks by inviting the Global Studies Program to study and to perhaps offer ideas to small island states, including in the Caribbean, as to how we may respond to a number of the issues I discussed here this evening. Please, I ask you here tonight, visit the Bahamas, including some of our various islands, where you may see for yourself our various development challenges, as well as our vibrant culture and natural wonders. Again, thank you very much for the invitation. May God bless each and every one of you. Good night.